Activision, the deal was 10 years ago, and many things have not gone very well.
It feels like it was 10 years ago, Scott Tilford. No, if you can't believe it, it was a year ago this week that this massive deal was finally closed. And I thought that, naively thought that would have been just the end of it. We could stop talking about Activision Blizzard after what felt like another 10 years of waiting for the deal to go through. But that is not the case. A lot has happened in the past year. And just the other day I was reading, well, on the day of the anniversary of the acquisition, Eurogamer published a really great timeline of events of a bunch of stuff that's happened since. So I kind of wanted to talk about that timeline because it was really illuminating. And I've added a few things in that I think interesting that were kind of more rumor-based or what have you, but a lot has happened, so I guess I'll just run down the actual timeline before we actually discuss it. So, on October 13th, that was when Activision Blizzard King was
All of this
bought.
Is years and years ago. It's insane.
For just shy of $70 billion. Then in December, Bobby Kotick, who was the CEO of Activision before that, leaves the company. In January, Xbox has layoffs across the board, but that involves Blizzard cancelling a new IP it was working on that was a survival game that was announced back in 2022. Also in January, PC Gamer reported that Activision Blizzard esports teams were heavily impacted. Everything that I've read about those teams kind of just suggests that they were gutted at that point and have been running on a really low employee count ever since. In February, Toys for Bob, that was also hit with layoffs in January, but then it went independent. Toys for Bob, of course, an Activision developer before that, had worked on like a bunch of the remakes and a bunch of other Activision franchises. In May, that's when we had the big Arcane Austin and Tango shutdowns and closures, of course, with the many, many strange and often infuriating comments from the likes of Matt Booty that followed in the wake of that. In June, Insider Gaming reported that Warzone plans had been overhauled and that the next big map was put on hold in favor of bringing back Verdansk, which was the original Warzone map. And apparently, according to Tom Henderson, who wrote that, he says that the main impetus for doing that was because Fortnite OG just got absolutely mad numbers and the nostalgia play was selling really well. So Activision apparently pivoted. In July, it was announced that Call of Duty Black Ops 6 was going day one on Game Pass. In September, we had more layoffs all across Xbox, but this heavily impacted the mobile team over at Activision Blizzard, and especially the games Warzone Mobile and Warcraft Rumble. And finally, later on in September, Tony Hawk confirmed that he was in talks with Activision once again to work on something new.
Our savior.
We have no idea what the hell that is. So that's the one maybe silver lining at the end of this. I've got some other notes and other thoughts on this acquisition as a whole, but in terms of pure timeline that Eurogamer wrote out there, like that's not a promising timeline, is it really? Not a promising 12 months.
There's the new book from Jason Schreier, from Bloomberg's Jason Schreier, who's also done various different books on the industry, Blood, Sweat and Pixels, and Play Nice, The Rise, Fall and Future of Blizzard. And he was over on the Nextlander podcast, just doing a general interview, just doing some general stuff about the book. And the way that Activision Blizzard were already working together was just kind of on fire in the first place. And he literally talks about rewriting the end of the book because initially it was more optimistic. The idea that because of everything that happened with Bobby Kotick and the different allegations, the different lawsuits that happened, the conversations around that, that when they went into the Microsoft/Xbox acquisition, it was like, okay, new dawn, new stuff, new energy. It's all going to work out. It's going to be cool. Then the layoffs started to happen, and then there's just been this complete mess of projects and whatever to focus on. And Schreier had to go back because obviously he has all these insiders, all these different people that he's talking to, all these different sources, and rewrite the end of the book to be like, it's actually just kind of on fire at the minute.
Wow.
And a lot of that goes hand in hand with the state of Xbox, like the general. Schreier talks quite a lot in that Nextlander interview about just how messy Xbox is. We've had glimpses into that, like you said, from certain people like Matt Booty, Phil Spencer, Sarah Bond, sort of being the trifecta of heads behind Xbox, taking on so many different projects, so many different IP, so many different wants and needs of an even bigger, like in a different company that's on the side. And then Matt Booty saying that it was just too many projects to juggle, so they had to let some people go. It's just, and you've got all the, how long was that deal waiting to go through in the first place?
Yeah, like a year and a half at least, I think.
That thing took forever to go through. All the legal finagling, if that's even a word, to get the thing over the finish line. And then like not knowing what to do with what you've actually acquired in the end of it, kind of thing. I think there are just too many plates to spin.
Yeah.
And I think this is an example of the worst of corporate takeover culture, if there is a culture to it, where there's just an assumption that it will all just work.
Yeah.
And that you're just buying a revenue stream in. And on the Xbox side, that was how they were able to stay in the green, was because they acquired Activision Blizzard. But when you really run it all down, like, it has been a hell of a year. And there are lots of bodies strewn left and right as they try and figure out how to even operate like this.
It's a proper interesting one, man, because there's so much to pick apart. I threw in the Arcane Austin and Tango shutdown because while not a direct, result of Activision's purchase, all of the rumors, all of the reports, all of the illusions that the executives like Matt Booty and Sarah Bond and Phil Spencer have made over the year seem to suggest that buying Activision and spending nearly $70 billion is what has at least partially led to Xbox changing their plans over the past year, really aggressively making all of these layoffs, trying to prioritize profits in a way that they never quite did before, and making games multi-platform, going back on promises that they might have made, or having a bit of miscommunication, if we're being generous, with fans and consumers and stuff, because everything, and I'm sure Jason Schreier has been mentioning it as well, but that idea that the Eye of Sauron is now on Microsoft, gaming. No? Yeah, it's called Microsoft Gaming. The Eye of Sauron
That's how messy it's got.
is now on Xbox from Microsoft because they're looking to recoup that money. But what's interesting, I think, is that when they announced their revenue for like the past year, they were only positive because of the Activision games and Blizzard games that they had bought in. So it's interesting that that company and its IP is essentially, it's been a lifeline to Xbox over the past year, but that hasn't stopped it from receiving layoffs and restructurings on this scale. No. So that is, it's in a bad position, I think.
Well, you called it. You mentioned that when the acquisition first went through, that this is an insane amount of money to ask for, and that idea of, obviously it's Microsoft, it's pocket change to them, but it's still a lot of money that needs to be accounted for. And the way that Xbox had been run for the last 20 odd years is so fundamentally different to being... if you go and watch the Xbox 20th anniversary documentary, which was a couple of years ago, it's on the Xbox channel. They talk about how scrappy they were as an upstart. Like, they were sort of given the money by Microsoft. They're able to do these things. It took forever to convince Bill Gates to get the thing off the ground, but then they were able to essentially be this sort of garage band, trying all these different things. They were just the right size team. Aaron Greenberg, all those different people putting that stuff together. And that is so fundamentally against the mentality that is now at Xbox, which is, like you said, comes from the Microsoft side of things, which is backed up by what Schreier says in that interview and in his book, that as soon as this deal went through, Microsoft was like, well, you need your P&Ls to be in order, your profits and losses, your charts, everything else. Like, we're going to come hammering down on that way more than we ever have before, because in decades prior, they didn't care, to put a phrase on it, they didn't care about the Xbox division that much, which allowed the creativity to flourish, allowed the developers to aim for something and be able to get there and not have to account for so many different shareholder whims or executive whims or whatever it is. And it just seems like this is the breaking point for all of that stuff. And like I said before, there are so many developers. What the hell's up with Double Fine?
Yeah.
Like, you can see another documentary thing. If you go and watch Psych Odyssey, the making of Psychonauts 2, in semi-real time, that thing's like 30 episodes long, takes place across, I think, like a 6-year gap. You see the bit where they're about to go under and then they secure funding from Xbox, and then Matt Booty himself is on the documentary talking about how it's going to save everything. And then they've just not been able to get anything over the finish line. And it's like that whole idea of Big Corpo being the savior or the way forward, like that. This is a rock solid bottom line and whatever. I think it's a way bigger conversation because you bring in the stuff that Xbox has tried to do, like cloud streaming and Game Pass, and then the market reaction to that, and then that is fascinating. And honestly, at the minute, it feels like all roads lead to Call of Duty on Game Pass.
Yeah,
and whether does that move the needle? Like, we're getting Black Ops 6 on Game Pass in like a week. So if that becomes a thing where all of a sudden it's like, let's go Xbox, then maybe.
Yeah.
But even as we're talking, there's a whole thing going on that apparently Xbox isn't going to be sold in Saudi Arabia anymore. I think it's Black Ops 6 isn't going to be sold specifically. But there's a whole thing about Microsoft responding to that and like trying to identify key regions they do want to stick with because sales are so low. So it seems like they bought it in to be like, let's bolster Game Pass.
Yes.
And then the market's already kind of moved on from it.
I mean, you've been talking about this for like 2 years at this point about Xbox. Will Xbox as a box, as a console, even be around going forward? And we're getting all of these conflicting reports, like you said there, about them maybe stopping sales in certain territories. I was looking at the console sales year on year from all of like the big platform holders, Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo, and all of them are down, but Microsoft's are down an astonishing amount. I think it was around the 58% mark in comparison to last year. And that's with Call of Duty on the horizon. Is Call of Duty being on Game Pass? One, is it going to drive Game Pass subscribers? And two, is it going to drive console sales? I don't know. It's going to be fascinating, I think, to see whether people jump ship from just buying it on PlayStation, as the majority has over the past couple of years at least, or if it's going to be enough to get people to think about picking up an Xbox or to subscribing to Game Pass. And even if they do that, how does that affect Call of Duty? Because is Microsoft and Activision willing to take maybe the hit on core Call of Duty sales if it means bumping up revenue for hardware and the subscription service? There's like a lot of factors, right? Because Activision Blizzard is a huge company, of course, and I think that even their successes we've seen kind of trimmed down to the bare minimum over the past year. I mean, I look at what I said earlier, them even sacking a bunch of people on Warzone Mobile and across the mobile division. After a year, that was disappointing, but the year before, that thing was doing really well. It was still like a lot of potential there. Them gutting the esports staff, I think, is kind of crazy considering how big esports is, but more importantly, how much cultural cachet that awards you and how much kind of personality that sometimes gives a brand outside of just their own marketing and the actual games themselves. It gives you that wider community. It gives you that wider viewership. It gives those games a little bit of something that the competition might not have. But if those events start, being reduced in quality because you don't have the resources, you don't have the personnel, like that's just going to ultimately affect the brand in the long term. And what I see from Microsoft and what I see from Activision, what I see from Blizzard over the past year is just like, and it's just a lot of short-term thinking. It's a lot of, well, how can we cut costs now? How can we get revenue up now? And we won't think about the long-term effects to the company or the brands of the games going forward.
My thing is like the optics of the Xbox brand as well. Like we talked about it in another video that we did a couple of weeks ago. Like we've been there since the very beginning. Like it used to be one of the most like, hell yeah, Xbox, effing rule. I love Xbox Live. I love that they mandate demos. I can go play anything on Xbox Live and get a demo for it. If it's an Xbox Live arcade game, something that might be on a PS3 as well, I can get a demo on Xbox. They pioneered so many things like that. Those first few eras were so good. And then it's just that thing. There's a weird, I don't know if it's a coldness, but like a sterility around the Xbox brand at the minute. And I know this is like a wider Activision Blizzard thing. But that idea of injecting it, like, can you actually save the general feeling around Xbox? Does it take something like Call of Duty? Does it take having Diablo, COD, StarCraft, whatever? You plug all those in. Does that save it? I'm curious about the Call of Duty sales. Like, you have like year-on-year sales. Is there a notable hit on PlayStation because people have it on Game Pass? Or like you were saying, like you'll probably just buy it on PlayStation anyway to maintain like feature power. All your mates are on there. Like that's where you can play. And like I'm interested if that's the majority or not. Does the average person even know that this is happening? Like, does the average person even know that if they get an Xbox or have an Xbox that they're going to get it on Game Pass? I think that's going to be a way bigger conversation and how that impacts on that weird back and forth between Xbox and Microsoft Gaming. The fact that Phil Spencer is head of Microsoft Gaming and not Xbox. And that other weird branding thing, which I guarantee some marketing department is tearing their hair out. The fact that it's an Xbox, but it doesn't even have a box, doesn't matter, and it's all streaming, it doesn't matter anymore. And they're pushing into TV dongles and stuff like that. So like to me, that all comes down on how long do you give them, and and give them as long as we want. Like it's fine, nothing's gonna happen on the coverage side. But it is interesting that we've given them almost 2 generations now. Like the previous generation, and we're halfway into this one. And it's still the same. It's still, we don't know what we're aiming for. It's kind of TV, it's kind of not. And now you've got Microsoft going like, we'll make it more like a Windows machine. Change the UI, make it more like it looks like a Windows phone, and do that stuff. And I think, to throw one other thing in, it is the Blizzard stuff where like, can Blizzard come back as well? Like, the new IP that they are working on. Like, Blizzard haven't released a Blizzard game in so long. So many staff have left, some people came back. But again, Schreier talks about the staff that did come back were like, this is a different company now. A lot of the heads that were able to work in a smaller space come back to a way more corporate structure. And someone like a Bobby Kotick and all of his billionaire mates who are just interested in product. Various people who worked at Procter & Gamble who like just compare shipping games to something like shipping a soap bar every year or whatever. Okay. Why can't you just do that faster and figure that stuff out? And that pure product mentality, games as a service, gaming as a service, I think is a way wider conversation.
It's funny, isn't it, right? Because I look at Activision Blizzard, and I see a company like Schreier mentions there that is only interested in making money, right? Yes. And I look at, with all due respect, and like you said, I was there for the Xbox, back in the day, the original Xbox, preferred it to my PlayStation 2, loved my 360.
Oh, preferred the PS2.
I actually did,
Interesting.
Yeah. As a graphics guy, I was like, look how powerful this is. Backyard wrestling, here we go. But, what was I saying? I look at Activision Blizzard as a company that is so narrow-minded on making profits. Say what you will about that company, they know how to make money. But in comparison to Xbox, that is a company that I have a lot of fondness for, but it's also a company that kind of does not know how to make money and has been not doing well on the business front for the past few years, even if they have been making some interesting creative decisions. So I wonder how much control the people in Activision Blizzard have and whether their plans and the way they've been doing business kind of brushes up against these decisions to put games on subscription services day one, or to not not know how to kind of push those products out to the best of their ability. I don't know. It's kind of a waffling half thought but I do find them very diametrically opposed in that way, at least previously, and I wonder how that's meshing internally.
Well, one thing that we know from the initial acquisition side of things across the last couple of years, all the legal papers and everything else, that Kotick didn't initially want to sell. It was a whole thing where they were going through various lawsuits. They were weakened stock price wise. It was just opportunistic. Phil Spencer put the acquisition together within a couple of weeks or something. It was an extremely short time frame. But that idea of that opportunistic side of it and coming in and internal conversations, Kotick is described by Jason Schreier and all the people, the sources that he's talked to within Activision Blizzard, as someone who is very charming or whatever, but is entirely product focused. Will take something, and it's like an Overwatch, and spin it out into like cosmetic packs, level packs, mode packs, season rollouts. How do we monetize every last bit of this until it's completely bled dry? That is almost fundamentally opposed to Game Pass, because if you're being extremely cold about it, Game Pass is giving you too much. I love it. We've said till we're blue in the face about how good of a deal it is. It is. It's phenomenal, and it's going to be even better when COD gets on there. But everything that someone like a Kotick stands for is anti-Game Pass, and is anti-giving the consumer everything up front. So that has to be part of why they can't reach a resolution on it. And I know there's all this stuff about what's going to happen with Kotick or whatever, but it's a mess.
Oh, you're right, man, because we're getting Black Ops 6 on Game Pass this year, and you look at how they treated Modern Warfare 3 last year, which was initially reportedly going to be an expansion for Modern Warfare 2, which released the year before, and it wasn't going to be this premium release. It was essentially going to be a continuation of a game that Activision thought would do well and would have the lifespan and would kind of make money off a smaller expansion, and then just the monetization inherent to a Call of Duty game's multiplayer and Warzone. And in that, they couldn't even take the risk on doing that, right? Modern Warfare 3 eventually had to be a premium release. They needed that $70, £70 Call of Duty game that year, and then they sold you everything else on top. So they scrambled something together. The multiplayers just literally just remastered maps from Modern Warfare to the original game. You've got the reuse of Verdansk. You've got this strange campaign that is a proper sequel, but plays really strangely, and all of these different kind of cut corners that you wouldn't expect, I don't think, from a premium release. And then you've got the exact opposite approach this year from that, which is kind of more experimental, and let's see if this works on subscription service. And I am interested alongside you how that's going to work out. I've got a few more notes, Scott, because we have been talking a lot about Call of Duty so far. We have been talking about Warcraft and Diablo and what have you, and I think it's interesting that even though Phil Spencer said when the deal went through last year that we shouldn't expect too many Activision Blizzard games coming to Game Pass or like we wouldn't see stuff like Singularity or whatever for a while. That still hasn't happened a year later. We have had the likes of Diablo 4, like you mentioned, come to Game Pass. We've got the expansion out now. We've got Call of Duty coming. But to me, where is the sort of celebration of the company's back catalog?
Where's the goodwill?
Where's the goodwill? Where's all of those games that these companies have in their locker that people love from years gone by? Where are the small things like Singularity, these cult classics, alongside the bigger hitters like the old Call of Duty games, which are on backwards compatibility but aren't on Game Pass right now? Like, why haven't those been rolled out? It's a completely different how they handled Bethesda, where immediately that was like, here's all of the old Wolfenstein games, here's Doom, here's Fallout, here's everything that you kind of associate with his brand, whereas they've been way more closely guarded this time around.
I wonder if that might come after COD, because I feel like like I said, does the average person even know that this deal went through? Like, probably not. And does the average person, it's not like when you fired up an Xbox, there was a big, like, you know, multiple tile banner thing saying, welcome Activision catalog. Like, you couldn't, or if I missed it, you couldn't filter by Activision. You couldn't go and celebrate their history. Or even, you know, I'm pretty sure the Xbox Arcade already had things like Pitfall on there anyway, or River Raid or whatever, like the original games that would become Activision. That you can play inside some of the Call of Duties. Like, that's what I would want, like in terms of like an archival thing. But maybe that'll come from COD, because I think there'll be a lot of people. It's like weird, it reminded me when Final Fantasy VII Remake dropped and people didn't realize it was one part of however many it was going to be. And it was like, sorry, this isn't the remake? And I wonder if that'll be a thing in a more positive way of like, oh my God, £70, £90 Call of Duty is just right there. That's cool. And then maybe they capitalize on that and be like, okay, the Activision name is positive again. Let's flood. Maybe.
Yeah.
I do think, and it's like, all you can do is like take the top off, like in terms of the rumor pie thing. But going off the way that people like Schreier talk about the way the business works, and even people like Matt Booty and Phil Spencer talking about like, I have to run a business, and I don't get the luxury of like, you know, not like forgetting about that. I just think those conversations are too cold and too number focused, and I just like, putting Singularity on Game Pass is going to pop me.
Yes.
Like, it might pop like 10 other people, and you get my goodwill, and I go, that's effing awesome. Hell yeah, that's cool. But they don't care about that.
No.
Not really. I think that, like, you're seeing some of it on the PlayStation side when they're putting, you know, Blood Omen, Dino Crisis, even though they effed up Dino Crisis, but they're putting classics on PS Plus. That's taken half the generation.
Yeah.
And so I think, and that took a change of leadership as well. So like, yeah, I think they'll get there, because you might as well. Like, it helps drive money, but the conversation just seems to be so cold and nakedly focused on COD and profits.
I think you're right. I think if you look at the layoffs that have been, you know, executed over the past year, laying off esports, laying off mobile teams, I think they would say, well, if we're making these layoffs, how can we justify bringing back Singularity? How can we justify paying people to hash out deals with Marvel to get back those old Spider-Man games or X-Men games or what have you? Because I think that's what they should be doing.
Massively.
But I can also see that within this wider company, if you're comparing that to putting the same people on the Call of Duty machine, which makes billions, it's probably not much of a choice to them. But I think it's a shame. I think it's a shame when you have such a good back catalog. For me, Activision should be doing exactly what Lucasfilm is doing with the Star Wars games, in bringing back the likes of Star Wars Jedi Power Battles, which we'll talk about later.
Bounty Hunter as well.
Bounty Hunter and Battlefront and Star Wars 1, The Phantom Menace. Like, yeah, I know those games are not going to make billions now that they're remastered, but it's just, to me, a sign of a healthier industry and a healthier company. Whereas if you can't get the likes of even a Singularity back up and running, and you certainly can't get the likes of a Spider-Man 2 or an Ultimate Spider-Man running or remastered, then yeah, you are just the Call of Duty machine. And I understand that's probably worth, you know, nearly $70 billion to have Call of Duty and Warcraft and Diablo, but to me, I look at it just as a missed opportunity, because those companies have so much more to them. But it's just getting, with all of these layoffs, just in the restructurings, just narrower and narrower in their focus.
And way more boring.
Yeah.
I think that translates over into why it doesn't feel like anything to interact with these ecosystems. It's like, cool, I got something for free on Game Pass. Like, that's all it feels like. It doesn't feel like a wider ecosystem or a wider personable, like I said, interaction, whereas it used to on the original Xbox, the 360. And I guess the attempt at doing the more TV crossover stuff before the Xbox One came out. But yeah, overall, it's been a bad year